As our meeting continues this afternoon, we'll turn our attention to Brother Meadows once again. The theme is, once more, rejoice.
It was a popular song that was written some time ago, and it was sung a cappella. Maybe some of you will remember it. It goes something like this. I have had no pillow for my head. No, wait, how did it go? It was so long ago. No pillow for my head. No, what is it, Jolyn? No, yeah, before that. No, see, I used to do this all by a cappella. I wrote it a long time ago. No, just kidding. No place for my head, no pillow for my bed, no money in my pocket, but don't worry, be... Yeah, see, now all of you are on the same boat with me. Don't worry, be happy. That's what it said, right? And he sung it a cappella, and the purpose of the song was to try to get people, off of their problems and just not to worry about whatever would happen type of thing. There was another one called Que Sera, Sera. Isn't that right? What will be, will be. Be happy. Why worry? An interesting mentality in life, with regards to not worrying about things and being overly anxious about things. Interesting that the Apostle Paul made a similar statement, if you will, in the book of Philippians chapter 4. And if you take your Bible there, you'll know when Paul was on the earth, he had many difficulties in life, and he had many reasons why he could have been depressed and overcome by anxiety and worry. He was an individual who experienced shipwreck. He wrote in his writings beatings that he had. He was imprisoned several occasions, even chased by wild beasts. That wasn't a very good day, was it? And so in the book of Philippians, look what he writes here. Philippians chapter 4, and a very simple statement about life in verse number 4, especially for a worshiper of Jehovah. He said, always rejoice in the Lord. And then as if he had to repeat the statement, he said, once more I say, or will say, rejoice. So it was a statement about the importance of maintaining joy in spite of adversity. Maintaining a level of understanding of what's going on and not allowing things to rob us of our joy. And the reason why Paul could make such a statement is because he came to the appreciation that joy was really just an outward manifestation of an internal feeling. That joy was not based on the external, that is lasting, true joy, not based on the external. It was based on what you find on the inside of an individual, that he could have joy in spite of difficulty or trial. And the proof of this is in the book of Proverbs chapter 17. Proverbs 17, if a doctor was going to make a prescription about life, he said this in verse 22. Proverbs 17 and verse 22. He said, a heart that is joyful. So notice that's an internal quality. A heart that is joyful does good as a cure, but a spirit that is stricken makes the bones dry. So the countenance is affected by the internal sense of peace and joy that a person has. What is the source of this type of joy? Nehemiah chapter 8 verse 10 says, the joy of Jehovah is your stronghold. So it's telling us that a relationship, an abiding relationship with Jehovah God brings internal joy that is a sense of stronghold. It is an impenetrable place when you have the joy of Jehovah in your heart. So it can't be taken away. That's why it uses that word stronghold. That is a structure of faith. It's a fortified place that you have that cannot be breached. And there's reasons for that. Throughout the scriptures you'll find different texts, like for example that Jehovah God is a very appreciative God. And so that every small act of devotion he notices. Every single little act of devotion, no matter how small it is, he rewards. The Bible also says that it's God's blessing that would make one rich if they had that spiritual perspective in life. And it also says that joy is a fruitage of the Holy Spirit, a fruitage of spirit in which you can pray for. And the Bible says that what also brings joy is that Jehovah gives a hope for the future that cannot be taken away. And so for those reasons, joy can be long-lasting and overshadow whatever trial an individual is facing. Now that doesn't mean that as a worshiper of the true God Jehovah that you're always in a perpetual state of jubilance, though. Because people would think there would be something wrong if that were the case. Isn't that right? Because all of us in this old system, we have troubles, we have difficulties. There's never a time where something else doesn't come up in our lives, and it may be another trial, just waiting to happen. And that is the case unless you're a circuit overseer. You're always happy. We're always happy, never sad. No, that's not true, is it? No, it's not true with anybody. Sometimes people wonder, how people are always happy, and they're not happy because they think everybody else is happier than they are. And that's not true. So when you think just for a moment about the joy that Jehovah gives us, it can be a strengthening virtue, first of all, but also something that is long-lasting and can always be rejuvenated when you maintain your relationship with Jehovah. Maintain a strong relationship. The joy can overshadow the trial. Now, an example of this, perfect example, is that with Jesus Christ. Paul wrote this in the book of Hebrews. Just for a moment, take a look at this. You remember this text where Paul was encouraging us to look, yes, at the perfect example, Christ Jesus, but there was a reason he said that we should look at this example. Verse number 2, Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews 12, verse 2, he says, "Look intently at the chief agent and perfecter of our faith, Jesus. For the joy," there's the word again, the joy that was set before him, he was able to endure torture stake and despise shame, and then has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Indeed, consider closely the one, that's Christ, who has endured such contrary talk by sinners against their own interests, that you may not get tired and give out in your souls. So he said, think just for a moment what Jesus went through. He said, for the joy that was set before him, he endured a torture stake. So Jesus didn't just die, he was tortured. Now how could a man who is in the heat of torture still be joyful? Sounds like something completely opposite. The Watchtower, interesting Watchtower on this, January 15, 1987 Watchtower, said 3 reasons that he was able to maintain a sense of joy. Now, he wasn't on the torture stake, just smiling at everybody and laughing and having a good time. He was under pain, but he still had an inner sense of joy. Number 1, knowing that he was having the opportunity to sanctify his Father's name and to be in position to help vindicate it. Number 2, that he was going to have an opportunity to redeem mankind from sin and death. That brought him a sense of joy. And knowing that his Father would not forget him and his integrity gave him a sense of inner joy. So much so that he could endure the worst, a torturous death. So there's a lesson in there for us. Paul said, look intently at this one, so that we don't get tired and give out in our soul. Sometimes we think that this whole system is torturous, just by living in it from day to day. But then again, Jesus taught his disciples to have a measure of joy. Remember in the book of John, chapter 16, John chapter 16, Jesus gave a beautiful illustration of a woman having a baby. This is a perfect example. A woman having a baby, right? So how many of you sisters have had babies? Raise your hand. Look at all the women that had babies. Look at that room back there. Hundreds of babies. All these babies. So that was no big deal having a baby, was it? Piece of cake, huh? No, it was a trial. Jesus said it's a trial when a woman brings forth a life into this world. If you have natural childbirth, it can be one of the most painful experiences. Through pain and trial. And in my former secular work, I had opportunity to deliver a number of babies. And I remember very clearly where one man, husband, was standing over his wife, and he was trying to help his wife, okay, honey, breathe, come on, honey. And she looked at him and said, would you shut up? I'm in pain, and you're the reason for this pain, And he started taking it out on the husband. I'm in pain. But then after the baby was delivered, it completely changed. You bring the baby, up to the mother to suckle, and it's like everything changes. It's like all the pain is gone. Oh, honey, look at the beautiful baby we brought into the world. And let's have another baby. So how many of your sisters had more than one baby? See, there it is. You have the one baby. The joy overshadows the pain and the trial. And you remember the joy. And Jesus said, much like faith, our joy can be so strong in serving, knowing that we're doing what's right in spite of whatever trial we have. Our conviction is strong, and it helps us to go through whatever trial. And we're just revalidating what you already know, but it's from the Scriptures, and so it helps to strengthen our resolve, doesn't it, as we look at that. Now, this is all true unless, here's the big unless, right? Unless you allow others or other things to take your joy away from you. That's the fact of life. Jehovah God is a stronghold for your joy unless you allow someone else or something to breach it. And that's up to us. Sometimes individuals, depending on internal feelings, internal circumstance, external circumstance, we can allow others or other things to rob us of our joy. And sometimes it's the way we think. Other times it may be external things that we have no control over. Either way, it doesn't matter. If we allow it to take away our joy, then our joy will diminish, and our joy for serving God can also go along with it. So let's talk about some of those things that may hinder us from maintaining this precious joy that we have. Like, for example, sometimes individuals can develop in this old system a very negative frame of mind. They become very pessimistic in nature, very critical of each other, and this can drive a wedge between them and others, and it can help destroy a person's joy in serving their God. Now, this is scripturally true. Go to the book of Proverbs 24, Proverbs 24, and take a look at this text here. Verse number 10. The writer says, have you shown yourself discouraged in the day of distress? Then your power will be scanty. That's what it says. It's a warning. Show yourself discouraged in the day of distress. Your power can become scanty, meaning that your power will diminish. You start to lose momentum, and then eventually your joy is gone. Chapter 18, the same thing. Proverbs 18, verse 10. Here's the thought of how negativism, being overly critical of others, can affect other people whom we associate with. Verse 14 says, the spirit of a man can put up with his malady, but as for a stricken spirit, who can bear it? Who can bear it? If we get into the frame of mind that everything is so negative, and we're always, one brother said, sometimes people play this game. He said it's called, Isn't It Awful? It's like, isn't it awful? Look at that. It's awful. Look, everything is awful. Look outside. It's awful. And today is awful. It's raining. Yeah, it's going to be sunny tomorrow. Yeah, but then it will rain again. That's awful. And you're awful. And I'm awful. And before you know it, there's nothing that's positive. The frame of mind is so pessimistic. So this one says that individuals with that kind of mind frame tend to drive people away. It says here, who can bear it? And that's exactly true. People who are around people who are so negative in framework, in their mind, they eventually say, well, you're just too much of a bummer to hang around with. And so they go find someone else. And then everybody wonders, well, how come nobody likes me? And how come I don't like myself? Maybe it's because we've become too pessimistic. And we live in a very negative world as well, so that can drive that feeling of negativity into us as well. Here's an interesting thought, though, from an Awake magazine. I brought this, it's a quote. September 8, 1981, Awake magazine said this. It said, negativity and self-pity can cause physical reactions. Distorted thinking and thoughts actually release chemicals into the brain that can induce or accentuate a depressed state. That's interesting, isn't it? That negativity, pessimism, self-pity can actually release chemicals that will induce or accentuate depressed states. Now, it's true that sometimes depression can be of a chemical imbalance, so one wise thing to do is to receive some medical attention so that those chemical imbalances can be reversed through medication. But many times, a doctor who prescribes medication for chemical imbalance for depression, clinical depression, will also prescribe cognitive therapy so that the person can start thinking in a way that's more productive and not so negative in frame. And many times this is exactly what the type of thing that's prescribed. Coming to a meeting like this that helps us to focus on the positive, that feeds us on the spiritual, that's like cognitive therapy, isn't it? Keeps our minds focused on the positive, not the negative. So when we think about things that can rob us of our joy, this is one of them. Other internal problems that we might face, such as health. Health can be a trial for people. As we get older, individuals experience the breakdown, the natural breakdown of the flesh, and we suffer all kinds of problems. And let's face it, the Bible says we're all terminal. Isn't that right? We're all going in that direction, slower or faster than the other. So it's how sometimes we face that reality, knowing that it's here, and facing the fleshly trials from day to day can also be, the way we face it can also be very helpful. Not too long ago in the Times Magazine, the beginning of this month, there was an article that said, everyone should live to be 100. And it went on to say how you could live to be 100. It said 5 things. Number 1, make it to 90. That's what it said. Make it to 90 first. And then it said, but it was really interesting because then it went on to say, the way we view things, our thinking. Do we focus on the negative in life, or do we take the challenges as a part of life, view it positively? Certain health things, don't smoke. So don't smoke. That goes right along with the Bible. And it said also with regards to certain other habits of life, certain diet and exercise. So it's some of the things that we already know, but it also focused on the way people view things. Their mental frame affects their physical frame. Same with our brothers when we're going from one shepherding call to the next on some of our weeks of visitation with congregations. We'll go into some places where our brothers are really very ill. And we come away feeling more encouragement than we felt that we could ever give to our brother. And that's because their mind frame is made up to be positive. How many friends do you know that really suffer with infirmity and problems, and they don't complain much? They just say, I'm pretty good for the shape I'm in, aren't I? You go, yeah. Especially with regards to the frame of mind. But then there's the others that might tend to be more negative. It's like one brother, you can ask him, how you feeling, and he can just let you have it. Well, if you really want to know, my head is aching, my back is splitting over here, and I've got this crick over here, my hip doesn't, and look, I had an operation, and here's a scar. Just overwhelms you, Then you're shaking, you don't know what to say. You're not sure whether you can help them or not. To encourage them. But that's the mind frame. Here's an interesting thought, too. It comes from a doctor on this. He is a medical doctor who is teaching people about the the psychological aspects of aging, how people face the aging process. And his article in the American Journal of American Medical Association, Dr. Paul Ruskin said this about how many times a perception of reality can determine how you feel. The perception of your perception of reality can determine how you feel. And then he makes the statement that many times a person's reality is only really virtual. So now listen to this. He gives this case scenario to prove this point, that a person's reality may only be virtual, not real, in other words. And he gave this case scenario. I have a patient to his class now. He says, this patient that I've been working with for the past 6 months does not comprehend the spoken word. She just babbles incoherently for hours. She's disoriented to person, place, and time. She shows complete disregard for her physical appearance. She has to be fed and bathed and clothed. She has no teeth, so her food has to be pureed. When you feed her, she always soils herself because of that. She has a very erratic sleep pattern. In the middle of the night, she'll wake screaming, and then all of a sudden she can be friendly and happy. And several times during the day, she'll get quite agitated, no cause, and then someone will come in to comfort her, and maybe she'll quiet down. This has been going on for 6 months. He says, I don't have the answer, so I'd like to have someone else evaluate the patient for the next 6 months. And that's exactly what his class did. Nobody raised their hand, No volunteers for that one. He says, well, maybe you need to meet the patient. So the patient comes out, and it's a 6-month-old baby girl. In pink clothes, big bowl, Oh, baby, let's have baby. I'll take care of it, So perception of reality was only virtual, wasn't it? By the description, what could it really be? And sometimes we're in the same way about our own perception of certain realities. So I think, the Bible is very clear in helping us to appreciate that, look, when we focus on what Jehovah God wants to teach us, and we really practice those things from day to day, it starts to affect our mind frame, our spirit towards others, our relationships towards others. Our joy is maintained, and because we have that sense of inner joy, we can face trials much more readily and also successfully. One other thing that may affect our joy, and that is sometimes people. You can't control people, isn't that right? Other people do things that sometimes can just drive you nuts, isn't that right? Can drive you nuts. Paul had this thought when one commentary in the Watchtower mentioned with regards to Paul's thorn in the flesh. You remember this? 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7. What could have been the thorn in Paul's flesh? One of two things could have been the thorn in his flesh. Remember what the thorn in his flesh was? Anybody? Just raise your hand. Okay, Brother Turner.
It could have been his eyesight.
Could have been his eyesight. And secondly, Sister Bramson.
The anxieties about the congregation?
Specifically, yes, Brother Watts.
The superfine people.
Yes, people. It could have been the brothers. Like they were causing him some trouble. And they weren't, giving respect for Paul. And this could have been like a thorn in his flesh. Now, either one could have been completely alleviated if Jehovah wanted it. Paul said, I prayed 3 times for this thorn in the flesh to be taken. Remember that account? And it could have been instantaneously. Jehovah could have just taken it away. Eyesight easy. That was a very difficult thing for Paul because he was always teaching people and he wanted to see what he was reading. Or it could have been the brothers that were causing problems for him. Jehovah could have given him leprosy, or something. I don't know. But Jehovah said to him in that chapter, he says, my undeserved kindness is sufficient for you. And it will help you to maintain a joyful spirit as well. And so Paul recorded that. He said, that's absolutely true. Jehovah gave him the strength. It was like one sister said, sometimes we just need to be humble. And we need to do what Jehovah wants us to do and not think of what we want. Let Jehovah help us out. Don't rely so much on ourselves. Be humble and let Jehovah take care of it. Isn't that true? It's a true statement. So when we face trials like this, what should we remember? Well, let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 7. Paul puts it all together, all these different trials, whether it's the fears and the doubts that we face, or the problems with brothers when they hurt our feelings, or when it may be just some kind of negativity that we have developed recently. 2 Corinthians chapter 7. The Apostle Paul was experiencing a flood of these types of emotions when he was in one of his theocratic assignments in Macedonia. In chapter 7, verse number 5, he records it by saying, in fact, when we arrived in Macedonia, our flesh got no relief. But we continued to be afflicted in every manner. So you see there's some continuous trial. There were fights without. That means external problems. Maybe it was with the brothers or those that were trying to oppose them. Fears within. Maybe his own doubts and his own inadequacies were bothering him. Maybe he had doubt of faith. And so it says, nevertheless, God who comforts us or comforts those laid low, comforted us by the presence of Titus. So now Paul helps us to appreciate a provision for strengthening. He says, Titus, his brother, someone whom he knew and appreciated, came to him and gave him some strengthening aid. And that is a provision that we never want to take for granted. Isn't that right? It's a provision that we receive on a regular weekly basis. You come to your meetings, you accept the encouragement of your brothers and sisters, and it helps us to get through trials. Never take that for granted. Always take advantage of it, though. And as you do, then you find that the provisions are just that, the strengthening power for going through trials, helping us to focus on the reasons for joy day to day. Beautiful watchtower. Well, could you have done without that watchtower now that you've studied it? No. Everybody, and you know, every single brother in the entire world who is actively pursuing their faith received that today. 6.5 million of them around the world. They all got that lesson today. And now think about the mindset that all of our brothers have around the world, about anyone who tries to oppose the preaching of the good news, and how Jehovah will strengthen us all to do that. You know, you should allow nothing and no one to take your joy away. Don't ever allow that to happen. And as you come to appreciate that more and more, you'll understand then that certainly as trials come, they also go. The way you've been able to survive it is because you maintain your level of joy and appreciation for provisions of strengthening. Towards the end of this discussion on this thought about maintaining joy, we've given you a number of scriptural texts now. Let me leave you with this final story that will help hopefully pull all of this together. And I think it's a little story that really demonstrates sometimes it's really the way we perceive all of these things that we go through from day to day that tries to rob us of our joy. It's a story of a little traveler, and this little traveler was on this road. He's a little older man, and he's walking down the road. He's got his little cane. You can just picture him, you know. And he's walking steady in pace, and he's forward in motion and looking straight at his goal. He heads through this little village. And as he's going through the middle of the village, walking steady in his pace, forward in his thinking and steady in his goal as well, this man, this vendor, calls out. And he says, "Hey, little man, little traveler, where are you going?" And the little traveler just looks to his side, never breaks his pace, and he says, "I'm going to the top of the mountain." And the vendor says, "Why are you going to the top of the mountain?" And the traveler says, "Because everything I ever wanted or needed is at the top of the mountain." And he kept on going, kept on walking, didn't break his stride. And the vendor starts to think, everything you ever wanted or needed is at the top of the mountain? And he says, "Well, what am I doing here?" And he leaves everything behind, leaves it all behind, abandons it. And he starts running to the top of this mountain as fast as he can. "I'm going to the top of the mountain too, little fellow. I'll see you up there." And he's running as fast as he can, you know. But before you know it, he gets really tired, this man. And now he's on his hands and his knees, and he's just inching, you know, crawling up the side of the mountain. Here comes the little traveler, steady in his pace, you know, forward in his goals, steady looking at his goals. And he sees this man down on his hands and his knees, and he looks at him very briefly and he says, "What are you doing down there?" And the man, he's all out of breath, you know, fatigued. He says, "I'm trying to get to the top of the mountain." He says, "Well, I don't know about you," the little traveler said. He says, "But if I were you, I'd take that 50-pound bag of manure off the back of my back." And the man said, 50-pound bag of manure? And he puts his hands on his back, and lo and behold, here's this 50-pound bag of manure on the back of this man's back. So have you ever heard this before? So he takes this bag off, and he throws it off the side and says, "Thanks, little man." He says, "I feel rejuvenated now." And he starts running again to the top of the mountain. Very quickly, he's all tired out again. Now he's on his belly. He's just scratching the side of the mountain. Here comes the little traveler, steadying his pace, forward in his goals and thinking. And he looks down at the man and he says, "What are you doing down there?" And the man now, he's all in tears, you know. He's just scratching, trying to get up to the top of the mountain. The man says, "Well, I don't know about you." He says, "But if I were you, I'd take that 25-pound pumpkin off the top of my head." The man says, 25-pound pumpkin? And he puts his hands on his head, and lo and behold, here's this pumpkin that completely encompasses this man's head. So he pulls the pumpkin off his head, and he throws it off to the side, and guess where he was? He was at the top of the mountain and didn't even know it. Now here's the moral of the story. The moral of the story is don't be a pumpkin head that carries 50-pound bags of manure. Very simple. You'll always remember this now, won't you? Sometimes people can become pumpkin heads because they don't see what they have. You offer them something of truth and of value, and they don't see the truth and value. You've got to take the pumpkin off. Take the blindfold off. Sometimes people carry around bags of manure as well. They load themselves up. All the bags of manure, they're all loaded down. And it's all symbolic of all the pains of the past, the grievances of this person, what that person did to me. And they're carrying this load of manure around. And some people just don't carry it back. They have wagon loads of it, all my manure. And they try to make it look nice, and they plant flowers in it. And if I made it look pretty, didn't I? You have to get rid of that stuff. Get rid of it, because it only pulls us down. It only creates atmosphere that lacks joy and purpose in life. And that's exactly what Jehovah gives to his people today. Over and over again, we have the provisions that are telling us, look to Jehovah God for help. Put the principles into work, and then you're going to find that there is actually an inheritance awaiting for you. It's found in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16. Deuteronomy, we'll conclude with this text. It's a beautiful text that focuses on the nation of Israel and their festival of booths. And during this festive time, a time where the nation had worked very hard to get to a particular point spiritually, with physical prosperity, Jehovah tells them now in verse number 15 of chapter 16, Deuteronomy, he says, 7 days you will celebrate the festival to Jehovah your God in the place that Jehovah will choose, because Jehovah your God will bless you in all your produce and in every deed of your hand, and you must become nothing but joyful. That was a command. You must become nothing but joyful. Why was it a command? Because it was the rightful inheritance of those who serve the true God Jehovah. That's why now do we understand why the Apostle Paul said, he says, always rejoice in the Lord. And then as if having to repeat it, he had to say, now listen to me. He said, always rejoice in the Lord. So at the end of this week of activity, hopefully you found that you have even greater reason to do just as the Apostle Paul said, always rejoice in the Lord. It's been nice to be with you here throughout the week. We had a nice week of activity, full week of activity in the ministry and here at the meetings. A number of things have been covered throughout the week. Hopefully if you've been taking notes throughout the week, you can review your notes, set your future spiritual goals, and we'll look forward with you to the blessings that you hope will bring as a result. Joel and I will be back about 6 months down the road, and we'll have another visit with your congregation. But between then and now, maybe you haven't been told this yet. I don't know if that announcement's been given to you, but your congregation has been selected to be the host congregation. Society has asked both Brother Holman, our district overseer, and my wife and I to come back during the week of your circuit assembly. And we're going to spend a few days with you during that week. Anybody know what a host is? Do you know what the host does? What does the host do? A host congregation. You know what a host does? What does a host do? What's a host? What does a host do? Yeah, sister, please. Yeah.
It takes care of the company.
That's right, the host takes care of the company. And at the circuit assembly, what does the host do? What does the host do at a circuit assembly? What do you do? What do you do, Brother Hoagland?
Take care of everybody.
Take care of everybody else. You're there early. Is the host there early?
Yes.
Yes, the host is there early. I mean, we have to be there early. Does the host stay late and help clean up? Aren't you glad you're the host? lots of privileges. But the circuit overseer, my wife and I, and our district overseer, Brother Holman and his wife, are all going to be together. We're going to have a nice week. Tuesday of that week, you get a special talk by Brother Holman. I think you'll find it very enjoyable as well. So we'll look forward to that week of activity with you. And before you know it, we'll be back and enjoying another week together in the service of our God Jehovah. So let's stand, 141 of us. Isn't that nice to see 141 here today? And let's stand, and we're going to sing a final song then to conclude our meeting, Song 56, and then we'll conclude also with a word of prayer. Song 56 goes right along with our meeting, Bravely Press On, 56.